All right, I think we are live.
Sounds good. We'll see how. Yeah, no, it looks
It's
live
hard
now.
to. I don't feel like the setup's like incredible, but that's fine. So this is largely just going to be a hobby stream, kind of a testing stream to kind of see how well we can kind of show some of what we're working on here directly on stream. Recently got a new arm to mount the camera, and that's what I'm trying to use here to show like part of my hobby workspace. Um, I guess to anyone watching or anyone who watches it after the fact, bear with us. We haven't really done a lot of this, and I envision there'll be a lot of focusing issues, but it is what
Yeah,
it
no, I
is.
mean it looks good from what I can
And
tell
it's not
so
really in
far, but
focus on what we're working on. So let's see if I how close the way that looks actually okay. Um, but yeah, so I guess today I was gonna do some work
I mean,
a
yeah,
new
that focuses
model
pretty well.
for Mordheim, the Mordheim band I'm working on. In this case, a new Sister of Sigmar. And so here you can see I've been starting to work on one of the newer Blackstone Fortress models as a basis. In this case, it's the pseudo redemptionist model. I don't really remember the
Pious Born, I think her name's Pious Born or
okay
something to that
her
extent.
because the thought was I wanted to make at least one Sister of Sigmar have sort of like heavier body armor and stuff, like maybe some chain or plate mail of sorts. And so this model seemed like the obvious choice for that because the scale's pretty good. It's pretty similar to some of the other models. Um, but okay, so I guess at this point I've done a little work on the model. Like I've replaced the model's head. If I can get it to focus.
Yeah, it's something that the Polysmith had created, right? 3D sculpted, right?
Yeah, this is a head that yeah, our friend the Polysmith, which um, many of you who are like following different hobbyists on Instagram probably already know of him. But if you don't, you should go and check out his work. He's supremely talented, and he, I guess it was last year, we collaborated with him to try and start working on some female Imperial Guard miniatures, and we had him design a whole series of female heads, which he designed and then 3D printed. And so one of those is on this model here. It's a little hard to see a lot of the features because of the like black. It was printed in like a black material, so like I don't. It's very
Yeah,
hard to
yeah.
actually see it here. But as I get further along and I prompt the model, it'll become a little more obvious. But so currently, I've done a little sculpting work on her armor, and I still have a lot more to do with that. I'm trying to make the armor a little broader around the waist and the torso because I think currently the model it's a little thin. And
Yeah, it
also,
is. It is pretty thin. Like I feel maybe some of that stuff is minimized or it's not noticed as much when she had that big flamethrower thing. But
yeah,
when you just look at it in relationship to the size of her feet and things like that, and like how big her hands
yeah,
are, it like becomes a little questionable considering she has relatively thick plate mail. Also, it seems Nick's here, or at least on YouTube, he said, "Hey."
very good.
I
Um,
don't know if that shows up
if it did, I
on the
missed it.
screen. Yeah, I missed it too. But there's a chance.
Well, if you're seeing this, or if you're listening to us now, feel free to say like a few, maybe comment a few more times, and maybe we'll actually catch one of them.
There's a chance with how Streamlabs works too that like the text box thing that you have set is buried underneath other screens such that you can't see it?
I think I have it set up in a way that it's not, but
Okay. Well, then maybe
that
it's
doesn't
just that
mean a whole lot.
uh, it
Um,
doesn't stay up long such that you just miss it.
but I guess yeah. So a few of the things, like I'm gonna try and do a few things today. One of which we sort of touched on this earlier about some of the weird proportions of the model. One of which is the size of the model's feet and boots. Wow, in this case, so we see one of the boots here, one of the official boots. It's actually really nice. Like I really like the look of them. And it is, I feel it's a little smaller than some of Games Workshop's boots and stuff. Primarily, I think because this is a female model and they wanted to make it a little smaller. But even despite that, I think they're a little big for this model. So I've been in the process of replacing them, and you can see I've already replaced one of the feet, 1 foot of the model. In this case, this is actually from one of Games Workshop's plastic, like water elves, I'll call them. Oh,
Eat the deep can in
yeah.
that something deep can. I don't know.
And so I have one of the character models that I purchased, and she actually has feet that are in a pretty similar position to um, the model, this model itself. So I replaced one of them already.
Hmm.
The funny thing here is that even after replacing it, I still trimmed this foot down a little bit, and I might even trim it down a little more because I still think it might have been a little big. Um,
Nick said you should definitely add some chainmail to her, specifically around maybe around the waist. Now I didn't see that pop up.
I certainly didn't.
And whether that maybe it was too quick or it's somehow some issue with Streamlabs, I don't know.
Yeah. No.
I mean, I guess the way it's currently set up for you, you probably can't like look on the computer screen and see what's showing up in Streamlabs. Is that correct?
I mean, I am now. I'm looking over, but as soon as I start working, no,
Yeah.
not really.
But like I recall the way Streamlabs was, unless it was up full screen, you would often not see the chat information, and therefore it was not super useful.
Yeah. Well, all right. So I guess I'm gonna go about trying to remove one of the other boot here for the model. Um, and so here, I guess to do that, I'm gonna use this little Tamiya clippers. If you don't have one of these, they're really nice. Um, I will say these were designed solely to clip plastic and other stuff like that. So you don't want to use this to cut pins. If you do, you'll deform the actual blades.
Yeah, I mean it says that on there, right? I think I can see on one side it says like for
For
plastic only.
plastic, yeah, it says for plastic here. So,
Yeah, no, I have one of them, and
if
like
you
I
need to
feel
cut like dress pins or something, you should just get another clipper. As like in this case, it's like a cheap craftsman clippers, and this is a little more sturdy and will handle cutting stuff like that.
yeah, but I find those cheaper ones, whilst they're good for stuff like that, they have a tendency to tear plastic, which like they'll cut a little bit, then tear the rest, which isn't really ideal for fine detail work.
No. Alright, so I cut off part of the model's foot here. And so now, based on how the model's sculpted and everything, I think I'm just going to go in here with an X-Acto knife and trim some of this up and round out a portion of it such that when I cut off the other foot, we can sort of try and slot it in there.
Oh, I bet you're really excited. I bet you're going to keep that other foot. Get a lot of use out of that.
Well, I have some of it. In all actuality, maybe you could do something with it. I have the other one.
I mean, I guess that they are smaller than many models. Maybe they can replace the feet on the other running one you're making.
Nah, yeah, I think not gonna do that. I'm just gonna sculpt them, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so now I'm just going in with an X-Acto knife and trimming off some of the extra plastic that I don't want.
Always towards the fingers.
Always towards the.
I mean, everyone always says like safety, like you shouldn't do that, but I find you just don't get the control you want otherwise, or at least I don't. I mean, maybe you could
You can do it.
work up to it and get better at it, but it's never what I've done.
Yeah, it can be hard. How poorly is this focusing, Eric? It goes in, I guess.
It goes in and out based on
Where I'm holding.
how you move stuff. Like it's looking okay now. The Warhound, I have a little Warhound I'm working on for Adeptus Titanicus, and he's watching your work. Looks good there. You can see carefully trimming at her ankle.
Yeah, so you do have to be careful if you're doing this. I tend to, whatever I'm clipping off, I tend to be pretty conservative and cut somewhat far away from the detail that I want to maintain, just so I don't somehow screw that up. Sometimes,
Yeah, that's certainly what I do too.
I mean, sometimes in this case, like if you really want to save the thing you're cutting off, sometimes you can sort of destroy it, but
Yeah. I mean, I feel if you are a little conservative about it, you can do a lot by just slowly trimming it away and like smoothing stuff out and such. And you can kind of almost like reshape stuff just with an X-Acto knife. I mean, certainly the more careful work with like green stuff can achieve a better result, but I still think you can do a lot if you have patience.
that's true.
Like even just your conversion corner model that on one of the recent posts with the Happen and Haber.
Yeah.
I feel even that like you removed her gas mask or breather thing, and you did a good job of kind of reshaping some of that stuff without necessarily needing.
That took forever.
Yeah, but that's like, and that's even in this case for the simple job you're doing now, which will still result in green stuff. It's still kind of slow work.
Yeah. Well, so now, well, let's see how easy it is to show this, but so you can see like the bottom of the foot. I sort of rounded it out into like a crescent.
Yeah, it looks fine. You can see that.
And so this will hopefully, like when I actually trim off the other leg or the other foot, we'll have at least some leeway there, and we can round that out. And then once the other one's cut off, we'll sort of have to just go back and forth, trimming both that and the boot here. And again,
Some green stuff.
have to use green stuff every model. Oh my god. Well, I can't get it to focus now. Oh, there we go. Seems as if this camera, there's like a really narrow window where it focuses. Actually, let me see something.
I guess being a webcam, it's like more akin to like recognizing faces and things like that. It probably has just, which it makes me wonder what most people use for stuff like this.
Yeah, no, I have no idea. I mean, this is currently it's just a Logitech like Pro web
920
camera or
something,
something.
or I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, so let me take a look at this again. So we cut off the foot there, and so now let's take a look at the other boot that I'm going to use. So here you have to be a little careful with some of these splicings and stuff. Like, it's pretty easy to end up making like the legs or the feet and stuff longer than you actually want them to be. And so oftentimes, as I said earlier, you just go back and forth trying to cutting a little more off slowly until you think it fits pretty well.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think I'll ever use anything with this model ever again. It served us well. Okay, so I cut the foot off. Can we get it to focus on that tiny little foot? Might be hard. Oh, yeah, there we go, at least a little. Okay, so now I'm gonna start trimming around the top of the foot where it will attach. So actually, let's just see how well or how poorly it fits in. Probably not. It's probably not gonna be too well. Yeah.
If Nick, if you're still watching this, I kind of wonder how clear the stream is. Like, I'm trying to watch it both on Twitch and through YouTube, and at least for what I'm seeing on Twitch, it's a lot. The resolution is a lot better, and I don't know if that's like my internet connection thing or like something about how YouTube is buffering, or I don't know shit about these sorts of things, but
So here's now where it gets tricky with some of these models. Like, a lot of these little pieces are really tiny and fiddly. Hopefully I don't drop the foot and have to search around for it.
Nick had some words of wisdom. Yeah, he says, "Nah, no need to scale things properly. A true conversion master just slaps things together. Winky face." I don't know anyone who does those sorts of things, Nick.
Just depends on how much time you have and how much effort you're willing to put in. Like, I feel in this case, I'm replacing the model's feet, and I'll probably end up re-sculpting some of the detail on the boots, but in the end, like, it's questionable how many people will even see or notice that the change was made. I mean, who knows? This model being from Mordheim, I would imagine, since the model was only recently released in Blackstone Fortress, this model will probably, Pious Born or whatnot, will probably show up in a ton of conversions. So we'll have to see how much effort I eventually end up putting into the model and how different I can get it to look from the base model. Let's see if we can get it to focus in. You'll notice
okay.
Were you gonna say something, Eric?
Nick says here that the stream quality is not too bad, and I actually realized, for whatever reason, looking around on YouTube, for some reason it was not on the highest quality, and it was on 360p rather than 720. So I think that was the reason, and quite why.
Okay, so here you can actually see something now. So we have, can we get it to focus? Come on, camera. No. God. Stupid autofocus. Just doesn't work right. There you can sort of see it. So you can actually see, like, so this actually fits in pretty well, but you'll notice, wow, it looks okay. The foot itself is probably still a little too far. It's probably a little too long. If I were to glue this on now, it would look alright, but I think I need to spend a little more time and get it to seat higher up and closer to the actual model, and that'll end up looking better.
But you want that long ankle look.
Yeah, that long ankle, that's what you... And so
Now, I was gonna say, I feel for any sort of conversion like this where you have to cut something down and trim it away. The first intent, like you never trim away enough.
Never.
Like you don't want to go too far and ruin something, but it almost always results that you have to keep going a little further than you initially thought because
the good thing is, like, most of the stuff, unless you really go at it, you can pretty much fix anything if you're willing to do a little sculpting.
Yeah.
So here I'm actually trimming out a little more from the boot of the model, and then I'll go back and...
Adam, you were never one to want to do a little sculpting. I'm currently trimming a little bit of one of the Blackstone Fortress Beastmen.
Oh, Beastmen. How quickly are they used in?
They're not in the initial game. The initial scenario. The only stuff that can show up are the Trader Guardsmen, the Spindle Drones, the Urgles, and the Negavault Cultists. I think that's what they're called. And so when playing the game and setting up your first game, you take all the encounter cards that they're listed on and shuffle them together, basically, such that when you have an encounter, depending on how many encounters there are or how many enemy groups there are, you reveal that many cards from the encounter deck, and then it's randomized. Like, oh, maybe it's some guard and spindle drones or whatever. But at the end of a game,
or the dreaded anvil.
Yeah, but at the end of a game, there's the precipice step where everyone goes back to Precipice, the space station, to Amehio, and you can buy equipment that shows up with your Archaeotech you may have uncovered. But there's also a legacy phase, which is actually the first portion of the step, and there's a legacy deck that has, I think, initially 12 cards in it, and if ever you reach a precipice stage and there isn't a legacy card to draw, you lose the game. Like the timer has run out. You didn't find the secret chamber or whatever, the secret vault. But so the majority of those legacy cards are just, say, like Countdown or something, and there's a neat little hourglass like illustration on it, and you just keep drawing them each game such that there's pressure that you need to keep making progress in your games and find that final vault, and if you don't, you lose the game. But some of those cards actually, like one of them you draw will say, like, add the Beastmen to the encounter deck.
Okay.
Or add the Chaos Space Marines, add the Psychers, or the Chaos Lord.
Add the
so
Cultist.
They're already in it.
So cool.
But yeah, so that's how there's progression in the game and how certain things are added to it. But like, I think even if after your first game you draw it such that the Chaos Lord is added to the deck, I don't think there are that many Chaos Lord encounter cards, such that maybe, this is your speculation, but maybe it's like, oh, and you shuffle in 4 Chaos Lord encounter cards, but the deck already has like 30 other cards consisting primarily of spindle drones, trader guard, and whatever, such that
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah. So even if you do kind of get that shitty pool first, it doesn't mean you're gonna like the very next game you're gonna be facing up against Chaos Lords all the time.
Maybe you'd want to though. Sounds like
But
it
the way
might
the game
change.
works, like, yeah, well,
Well, if you
what you can
kill the
do,
Chaos Lord, can he come back? Or is he
he can
gone?
come back.
I so I might have. I
Oh,
might
and
have
because in
trimmed away enough to try and
okay.
place the foot. So
Hey,
if you
someone
have.
else seems to be on here. Destiny Blooms. Hey, from the Ashen Pear on Instagram. Happy to catch the live stream. Love what you guys do. Well, thanks.
Hey.
Good to see you here. And
Yeah, so this is our first live stream working on stuff, so it's probably not gonna be that good, but. um,
yeah, nah. But I mean, it's
oh
you
boy.
have to start somewhere, right? I mean, I feel it's working
At least a
okay.
bit.
Like it's not maybe necessarily the most focused, but still, just being able to sort of see the process. I feel everyone uh, tackles conversions a little bit differently in the
Yeah, so there
materials
you
they
can see,
use.
so
Or
the boot, it's fitting pretty well. So I think what I'm soon, I might trim a little more off, and then I'm gonna probably apply a little bit of this um, Tamiya extra thin cement. And so if you're not already using this, it's a pretty nice plastic glue. You can use it for a bunch of things, but one of the nicest things is since it's so thin, it'll use capillary action to like move. Like if you have two pieces together, you can just apply a little of it and it'll be sucked into all of the little seams and stuff. And in this case, I'll apply a little, and it should start getting a little tacky, and that'll allow me to reposition the foot and hopefully experiment around a little bit and see if the model stands flat on a base. And
yeah, no, the stuff is super nice. It's also nice if you're like doing a lot of work like you are, kind of trimming off detail and trying to smooth it out. You can apply a thin coat of this, and it like smooths it out a little bit.
actually, one thing, let's see if I can get it to focus here. So on this model from Blackstone Fortress, there are a lot of like undercuts and stuff on the model that I went in and tried to like trim out a little of it, particularly this like little tabard or whatnot. I like started going in and like cutting. Let's see if cutting out some of the extra plastic in here. Come on, camera. Well, there you can sort of see cutting out some of the extra plastic in here, and particularly like underneath it to separate away this part from the cloak. It's probably a waste of my time, but I was doing it. Um,
Well, I feel, yeah, I mean, a lot of, particularly with Games Workshops, like very small amount of piece, single cast things, like it's hard for them to, they have to cut corners somewhere just such that the casting works. But it certainly can improve the look of a model a little bit if you kind of pull out, like cut out some of those shallower, like undercuts or whatever. But and also, that's kind of what I was saying, that you can go in and put a little of the thin cement in there to like kind of unify it a little bit and it
yeah, and
not
that's
look so
actually what
like
I did
scraped up,
here. So like when
which
you do
helps a
some of
lot
that,
after.
yeah, you'll see a little like scrapes and stuff from the X-Acto blade. If you add a little bit of that cement, it'll often do a nice job of kind of cleaning some of that up. In this case,
Oh yeah.
I've noticed it actually discolors the red plastic though. I don't know if you can see it very well. It
Mm.
probably isn't going to show well, but come on. Like I added a little to the inside of the leg of the model, and it now, oh, come on, it discolors it like an orange, which, oh I'm soon gonna give up.
I think you can see a little bit, but I mean, ultimately, it doesn't matter a whole lot.
No.
It's not like those colors are gonna be there in the end. But one thing, the Destiny Blooms here is say the Ashen Pear on Instagram. He has a really nice Gilliman conversion from like the Forge World Primarch model that I'm sure you've seen at
Yeah,
one
yeah,
point.
yeah.
But he's like kind of holding up like a scroll almost, and he has
Mm-hmm.
the mace from Horus.
Yeah, he looks
Really
great.
nice, some really good green stuff work for some like flames and stuff that aren't like overdone, which GW sometimes has a tendency to do. But like, yeah, really nice, and it's good to see people put those
Overdone
Forge World
flames right
Primarch.
there.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's always good to find someone who isn't afraid to use a little bit of green stuff because it can certainly be something that can be really, I don't know, nerve wracking and hard to like start to use. But I mean, I feel that's kind of with anything. When you first start painting, like since I've slowly started to paint stuff, it's always kind of a little um, tough to just start doing it. But when you do, it's usually a little bit easier.
Yeah, it gets easier every time. In particular with green stuff, you don't necessarily have to start out with something too complicated like resculpting someone's robes or something. Like hell, it's to the point where like I wouldn't even want to do that, and I've been sculpting stuff for years.
Yeah, but I think just if you are starting to want to use some of it, just the fact of like using it to fill in some seams or like maybe you're putting together some of these Blackstone Fortress models or whatever, you don't really want to convert them much, but some of them just how they push fit together, there'll be a seam or two that you
Yeah, I
can
mean
just
this
put a
model
little in
itself, like which
and it helps. And it just gets you more comfortable with
I
using
mean
the
there are a lot of
material.
seams along the side of the robes and stuff, which I started filling those in. I guess I also trimmed off this one armored plate on the side of her thigh. Um, but okay, so I think I'm soon ready to attach the foot or start attaching it and then maybe pulling it off because I'm not satisfied. Well, we're going for it. I'm gonna apply just a little of it. And then if I like what it looks like, then I can always go back and add more.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's so nice about the glue. Like I mean, it will ultimately be pretty permanent since it sort of melts the plastic, but it gets tacky enough that it will be stable, but you can still break it if you need to, and you can kind of strengthen the bond after you're satisfied, which is a lot easier than just using like a cyanoacrylate glue, which can like just pretty much immediately makes the bond sometimes before you wanted it, and then it's hard to make up for that.
So that actually looks okay. So there you have both of the feet. Yeah. Maybe I. Well, God, I'm awful at this. Oh, there, it's finally kind of. That looks okay. So wonder if we look at it in terms of a base, like how flat does it? That's actually not too bad. Oh, there, I dropped it. Huh, didn't break the foot off. That's good. So I will say that's one thing that can be tricky. Like I feel on lots of models I replace and change their feet, it can often be pretty hard to make it such that they still stand relatively flat on their bases. And if you're making your own bases, it doesn't matter quite as much because you can often just modify them accordingly such that the model
Mm-hmm.
fits on them. But it can still be tough.
Sorry, I was going there a little bit. I dropped a piece on the dropped a piece, and I had to try to find it. So,
In the new apartment I'm in now, there's carpeting on all the floors, so that's kind of bad. It's gonna be hard. I haven't lost anything yet, but it's gonna be rough. Okay, so I'm actually pretty
yeah.
happy with that. I'll have to.
Adams, I think I muted stuff here.
Oh my god.
Love you too.
Stupid camera. Oh, there we go. So that actually looks okay. Now I have
Can
to.
you hear me at all, Adam?
I can still hear you, Eric.
Can you hear me now?
I still can.
Okay. Hmm. I don't know how this mute button works. You still hear me?
I can still hear you. Maybe it doesn't
Hmm.
work.
Yeah, it might not.
The only thing I don't like about this thin cement is the bottle design. Like the brush is really thin, where it doesn't go down very far into the bottle. So there's still a lot of the cement in here, but it doesn't. It's
Yeah,
hard to
it's true.
access. So I have to shake it around. Okay, so now that I'm sort of happy with the placement, I'm gonna go back in and add a little bit more of the cement. And you can just dab it on and it will get sucked into the seam. And then it will slowly start melting that plastic and give you time to play around with it.
AGO at Taurus. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. Based on their like connection to the Forge world of Phaeton.
Okay, so I think yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. But so now I'll have to actually wait for probably a significant amount of time for this to actually cure properly. But if you go in and look at the boots, like you can tell there's there's a pretty big gap between like where I attached the new foot and the base of the boot. So, come on, camera. Maybe. I know. So, once this sets, I'll have to go in with green stuff and fill that in and probably try and resculpt some of like the folds in the leather. And that would be
Yeah,
something
yeah.
that I feel would be good to show, but I don't know if it's gonna let
Can
me
you
do
still hear
that.
me talking, Adam?
I can still hear you, Eric.
Yeah, wow, the mute button on this just doesn't seem to do anything.
Cool.
Mm.
Yeah, so here you can kind of see there are a lot of areas that need to be filled in. And the same thing's true with the other boot. think I chant. Also, like you'll notice with these boots, they bow out pretty broadly at like the base or near the front of the foot, and so there's a chance I might straighten that out a little.
Yeah.
If we look at one of the first Sister of Sigmar that I've been working on here. For this one, can we get it to focus? For this one, it was based on one of the newer Kaldor Necromunda models, and I replaced the feet with, in this case, Wood Elf Glade Guard feet. But even those feet, I thought were too broad and like almost like cartoon like Mickey Mouse feet. So you'll note it like.
Yeah,
it's hard to tell without like a real reference, but I like trimmed it down quite a bit to get it to.
Yeah, it's substantially smaller.
Bit more like a boot.
You intend to do more sculpting on the boots?
Yeah, they're not done. I need to sculpt some little straps and buckles and stuff on them. And this other boot over here, I still haven't finished a lot of the detail work either. But so there's a chance once I'm done with that, then maybe I'll just say this model's finished. I've spent enough time on it. So actually this model I think was one of the first models that I actually tried sculpting like cloth and stuff, and like folds and cloth. You can see on her like little half cape here, and so I think it turned out all right. But I've always been leery about doing it because I didn't really think I was necessarily good enough at sculpting to do it well. But I think the main thing you have to think about and look at when doing it is you don't necessarily have to sculpt it all in one go. And that's certainly something with this here. The current part of the cloak, I probably sculpted it in maybe like 3 or 4 separate sessions, adding more and changing things. And so I'll probably, before the model's finished, I'll probably spend another session or 2 just detailing some of it and correcting some of the mistakes and stuff on it. So that's one thing in terms of some form of advice I can give. I can't say like I'm an incredible sculptor or anything, but I think something that's helped me is just the notion that I can always come back and I can always change and improve it, and there's not necessarily a rush. Like it doesn't have to be perfect the first time you do it. And particularly if you can get some nice like reference pictures, like those can go a long way with helping achieve a semi-believable looking result. So I don't know where Eric went. Hopefully I didn't lose another piece. And so the same thing goes for this the second Sister of Sigmar that I've been working on. And so for this one I've been doing a lot more sculpting of like cloth and stuff on the model. And some of that it's helped me looking at different references of cloth and stuff. And again,
for a little bit there, and I realized why the mute wasn't working. You can hear me now?
I can hear you fine.
You can?
Yes.
Okay, it was because I guess I have both the webcam microphone and the Blue Yeti microphone, and I guess it must have defaulted to the shittier webcam microphone.
Oh, cool.
But so that would be interesting to see. I mean, I think through Streamlabs, you'd probably set it up such that it's defaulting to like your better microphone, which is probably what you want. But
Yeah. So on this model as well, like I've also been doing some work to like cut off some of the little like Inquisitor or like Imperial iconography. So in this case, I cut off the one little icon, and I think but I decided I didn't like how I had positioned it. So I cut it off and we'll redo it. And so that sort of goes and reinforces what I was talking about earlier. Like I feel a lot of green stuff work. Like if you're willing to, it's difficult to tell. It's difficult to tell if you've got everything right immediately, particularly with, like I know when I've been doing some work on like some of the true scale space brains and stuff that I've sculpted. For some of that stuff, I feel I sculpted and resculpted the legs several different times, and you get something that you think looks pretty good, but then once you've done more work on the model and you look at it some more, you realize, you know what, that's not quite right. And just, if you have time, go back and work at it a little more until you can get it as good as possible.
I mean, this isn't exactly the same, but I feel even with something like painting, like there's always a phase of painting that you think it looks kind of everything looks kind of shitty, and in some sense, you have to kind of push through to get a better sense of what it's like until it's a little bit more complete until you can kind of be sure. Like, wait a minute, nah, I guess you're right. That can work, or it is okay.
I didn't screw up the model. That was the biggest thing that kept me away from painting for a long time. So I'd spend all this time converting and sculpting a model, and then I'd almost feel like as soon as I'd start painting it, I'd like ruin it.
Destiny Blooms here asks, will you be doing any sculpting on stream, Winky Face?
Yeah, so I'm waiting a little while until I'm satisfied that this boot has fully dried, and then I'll try and do a little bit of that.
Today, you mean?
Today, yeah. So I guess if we look at the model, I'll try and sculpt a little bit, at least around this first boot, which I had already attached before we started the stream. Yeah. And then also, this model here, I've started sculpting an eye patch on this head. And you can sort of see, like, the patch itself is done, and I started sculpting the little band holding it on. And so here, earlier, I had sculpted part of the band, but I then decided to stop and not try and sculpt the whole thing because I was pretty confident if I did, I'd screw it up. So I'll do a little more, hopefully do a little bit more of that and maybe complete it. Oh, damn.
Yeah, it's from my experience, green stuff work. Like, you just can't do that much. These sisters, Sigmar, now you have a bunch, all of which need various sculpting work. So since you have a bunch, you kind of can move on to different models and still keep working on them.
Yeah,
because it does take a little while for it to cure, right?
It does. Like most of the time when I'm working on something, I'll do a little bit of sculpting and then I often won't do any more for like a few hours to make sure it's set fully. So actually this is a side note. But so as I've been working on these, like I've seen a number of different hobbyists working on their Mordheim models. And one of the newer entries, Migzula from Iron Sleet has started making some vampire count conversions. The first of which is like a vampire lord, and it's a pretty neat model. One thing that I always found interesting, like the sword, the vampire count sword he's using, it's a really neat sword, and like I purchased it like years and years ago under the guise that like, oh, this is going to be an awesome sword to use on something, but I've never gotten around to using it primarily because of how big it is. So like, let's.
Nick says Vampire Space Marine.
Oh, he does. That's
You
true.
mean
He does look
he's
a lot
not a
like the
Blood
size.
Angel, Nick? It's not
So
a Blood
okay, so
Angel.
here's a good size comparison for you. That is a huge fucking sword. Like it's
I
interesting.
feel, is it a little
Migs did a
off
pretty good
screen?
job of choosing a model that could actually wield said sword. Like a Primarch sized model is about the only thing that could reasonably wield this. And on top of that, it would still probably look like a two-handed, like Zweihander or something. And if we look at one of the other sisters, like, oh my goodness. And then the second sister, Sigmar, I actually decided to use, I wanted to actually make a larger model. And in this case, one of the alkalites from one of the Zinch warbands, they had a female model here. And this is actually scaled significantly larger than the other ones. I sort of wanted that to kind of have a range of sizes of models in the warband. But even for her, I mean, she couldn't wield this. It's gone. It's on the floor. It's gone. Oh, actually, no, I found it. So,
Well, actually, I mean, you probably have a Forge World Primarch somewhere around there. Like, I mean, not that they're all the same scale, but like, it would be interesting to see one of them in relationship to some of these models.
yeah, they're big. It's a big sword. And I don't even. I mean, even the hand that's attached to it's also huge. So, like, look at that. He has a ring,
Yes.
several rings actually. So yeah, it's a huge sword. Oh, actually, we can do another comparison. The probably overly scaled new Necromunda models in the trench coats. What do we think that's gonna look like? Oh boy,
They're It's probably still gigantic, or it has to
it's
still be
it's still
gigantic because it
huge.
is gigantic. It's kind of weird to be talking with you on stream here or also watching the stream because it's at least like
A few like a
20
minute.
seconds behind,
Oh
more
boy.
maybe. I mean, that's just how it is, but it's interesting to like be talking with you and it's like, wait a minute, I'm only seeing. Yeah, okay, so now the lock model has shown up.
Yeah, it's huge. Okay, so I think
So yeah, I guess ultimately it's huge. That's huge, and it'll be interesting to see how that scales next to other models and stuff for the whole Mordheim event. Which I mean, admittedly, everyone's starting to use 40K models for lots of their conversions from the Caldor models and things like that. So I mean, everyone's moving towards larger scaled things in general, but
yeah, because that's what
still,
Games
it's still
Workshop has been
gigantic.
doing.
Yeah, it's just what Games
Alright, so I
Workshop's
think I'm
doing
gonna
with
try and
models.
do some sculpting. We'll see how well this goes on stream. So primarily I use green stuff, which you can sort of tell if you've looked at work in progress models. I do have some milliput, but I haven't used this too much, so I don't have a ton of experience with it. Um,
Have
for
you
a
used it at
while, I was
all?
buying like Games Workshop green stuff, but eventually I found I could just order Army Painter green stuff on Amazon. It's probably cheaper. I think they give you more. It's just easier, and I found they're pretty much the same thing, if not exactly the same. So you can pretty much use whatever you want. All
Do you
right,
find that like this stuff goes bad over time?
it does. It does go
Do you
bad.
think it wouldn't if it was separated? because I know some people will buy like
Yeah.
separate tubes of the stuff. Maybe it tends to
So I
go
mean
bad
that I
more
think
quickly
that's
because
sort
they're
of.
already combined,
I mean that's at least
or
a
they're
little
not
true.
combined. But
Um, like sometimes I'll actually like cut out at the center here. I'll cut off some that I'm gonna use, and you'll actually see me do this soon. I'll cut out the part where the two halves meet because oftentimes that doesn't. If you like mix it together, it doesn't knead as well because they've been in contact with one another, and I just remove that. But
yeah,
even
okay.
not even considering that, after a while, like once you've opened this, it gets. I've noticed some of the stuff gets harder and harder to knead, and as soon as it starts doing that, I often just throw it out. Like, it's sort of wasteful, but it makes working with the modeling putty much harder as it gets older, and I don't. I'd sooner like since I'm only making like 12 models a year or some shit. So I'd sooner just buy more of the stuff than work with some that's started to harden and doesn't work as well.
Yeah.
So how I often do this, I have like a little tub that I fill with warm water, and then I keep the green stuff underwater, and then slowly take off some as I use it. I don't know if this actually helps or anything, but that's what I've taken to doing, and yeah. So I'm gonna go and get some water. I'll be back. Eric, talk to him.
Nick says that some of his older green stuff or has like weird hard lumps and stuff in it. So I don't know. Maybe that's
Yeah, so that stuff will start to happen as well, and I just tend to. Once that starts to happen, I either just get rid of it all, or I spend some time and try and remove any of that stuff before really trying to
and
use
yeah, I
it to
guess it
sculpt.
also kind of comes down to what you're gonna try to do with it. If you're actually gonna try to sculpt, um, like really sculpt details and stuff, like I think it's more important that the stuff
Yes.
needs well and stuff. But I mean, if you're like honestly, most of the stuff I do is filling gaps and stuff like that, and it
But I
maybe
mean, even
doesn't
when you're
matter
filling
quite as
gaps,
much.
like it's a lot easier to do that if
Yeah,
the
I
green
guess
stuff is
that
newer.
is true, such that
So in many regards, like I know, like for a while I was like, oh, I don't like the GW green stuff because they don't give you that much. But at least for me, like I use it so slowly that by the time I'm done with it, like I probably like by the time I'm like halfway through all of it, I'm sort of at the point where I want to throw it out. I I
yeah,
know I have
so,
heard some people say like you can actually freeze the stuff and it stays better. I've never tried that though. I've even
hmm.
heard once you've mixed the two halves together, you can freeze it and it keeps it good for a long time. But I've never tried that. I'm more on the act of just throwing it out. All right, I'll be
I
back.
mean, yeah, I mean, it's not that expensive
I
ultimately.
mean, if I was sculpting full models all the time, like maybe then, but I'm not at this
Yeah,
point.
yeah, and like if you, as you mentioned, like you don't, we don't make that many models to begin with. I would rather, putting as much effort as we are into them, I would rather them be as good as they can be, rather than like trying to save $10 when like just that model there is, or a lot of the models are a combination of all sorts of kits, which so it's a different, it's just some, you have to kind of weigh with the sort of things that you're doing and what you want to do. But yeah, yeah. But I've been spending recently a bunch of time painting a Warlord Titan, slowly painting a Warlord Titan, building one of the little Adeptus Titanicus Warhound Titans, as well as slowly trimming and assembling some Blackstone Fortress models, most of which I've kind of trimmed down some of the tabs such that even if I snap them together, I can always kind of pull them apart if I want to convert them and such. But at the moment, I wanted to just get as many of them assembled such that I could try to actually play the game a little bit, and rather than just in another box that's sitting around not being used, which, well, as I feel almost anyone in this hobby can attest, they probably have a lot of boxes of models sitting around unassembled for various reasons.
All right, I'm back. Did I miss anything?
No, not a whole lot. I was just talking about all the stuff I'm kind of working on and trying to assemble, and
Yeah.
the Blackstone Fortress stuff, which I had mentioned a little bit earlier. But do you know what's even the goal in Blackstone Fortress? I know you haven't played it. I only played like one.
No, I don't. You might have told me, but I don't remember.
You're trying to find some hidden vault within the fortress, and the way you do that, you have to like during games discover clues to where this vault is.
Okay.
And I guess each session, ideally, you want to discover 4 clues such that in the next session you play, you can discard the clues to play a random stronghold mission. And essentially, you have to defeat 4 strongholds to ultimately find the location of the hidden vault to play the final scenario.
Okay.
So that's the legacy thing that I mentioned about how after each game you draw a card, and if there aren't enough, the game you've lost the
Yeah.
game. So you want to like each game you want to explore the place, find archaeotech to like sell for better equipment, as well as find clues. And I guess ideally, each session you weren't attacking a stronghold, you would find at least 4 clues, such that the next mission could be going to a stronghold. But like
Yeah.
I guess there's a chance you're playing, and then all your characters almost die, and you don't, and you just like, you know what, we're pulling out because we don't want someone to die, and then maybe you
Yeah.
didn't get 4 clues, so that's how like you might have to play multiple
Hmm.
sessions to get enough to
Okay.
go to one of those strongholds, and then that's sort of, but doing that you're kind of running down the clock for how many games you have and that you have to win the whole thing.
Okay.
So I think it's an interesting way to add a little bit of sort of finality to
Yeah.
everything and make it such that you kind of have to take at least some risks, which I think is good.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I don't know. I guess I'm gonna start trying to do some of the sculpting. A couple things. One, some of you probably already know this if you've sculpted stuff for a while. But one of the most important things you can get to do this are these like color shapers. They're called. The ones I have are actually made in the UK. Royal Solvern, I think, is the name of the company, and essentially they make these like little tools where there's like a little vinyl tip, almost like a paintbrush, but instead of bristles, you have a little vinyl shapes, and these make working with green stuff much easier. Like I can't stress enough if you've been doing sculpting and you haven't used these little color shapers and stuff, you really need to. They make the whole process much easier. And I will admit, most of the sculpting I do is just solely through like them. Um, Also, I guess as I'm doing this, if people have any questions, feel free to ask them, and I'll try and answer them if I see them. Okay.
Yeah, have you seen any of these chat things?
No, I've not.
Yeah, okay. So I guess there's a chance it shows up in the Streamlabs stuff that you probably can't see due to
Yeah.
the monitor setup or through YouTube, which for whatever reason aren't showing up on screen, and whether that's because it's set up wrong or It's just, I don't know.
Alright, so yeah, so here I've cut off like a sizable amount of green stuff, and then yeah, the first thing I often do is I'll just cut out the center, because I don't really want where the two halves meet, and I get rid of that. And then the other two halves,
Destiny Blooms here mentions that he'll have to check those out. I assume referring to the color shapers.
they
And I
are
mean,
like,
towards that end, I think on our blog, between the bolter and me, along the top, there's a section for like tools of the trade or something. It kind of talks about some of the things that we use. And I think there's more description of them in there, such that if you want
yeah.
to see what to search for or whatever. But I think pretty much just silicone color shapers or something to that effect, you'll find them. And yeah, they
Yeah, like I
really,
can't
really
stress
help.
enough how much they've helped. One of the things that's really nice about them, green stuff and like modeling putty tends not to really stick to them, such that you can use that to shape the stuff a lot better than like even like some of the standard sculpting tools. Like I think this might actually, yeah, this is actually even a GW one from years ago. I mean, this it can be helpful for certain things, but the modeling putty tends to just stick to it, and unless you're applying some type of oil or Vaseline or something to prevent it from sticking, it's much more of a nightmare. Alright, so I kneaded together the green stuff, and I often just take
Yes,
off.
or Destiny asked if you do use Vaseline also.
I've never used it. I've heard some people swear by it and they like it a lot, but I've never used it. The color shapers have largely made it such that I don't really have to. But and then so I pretty much use the color shapers and an X-Acto knife. The X-Acto knife I often that's what I use to help initially apply the green stuff, since the end is smaller and easier to work with. So here I'm gonna try and start filling in one of the little gaps for this boot here. So I use that to kind of get some of the green stuff in there, and then I'll take one of the color shapers. My favorite of the color shapers are these ones that have, it says like angle chisel, and it pretty much just looks like a knife blade. That works really well, and you can kind of go in here and just start shaping the green stuff around. I don't know if we can see that at all. There you can sort of see it. And so you can then just slowly knead it around the whole way around the boot. And you'll notice, like I've been doing this whole time, and if you look at the blade itself of the chisel, green stuff still hasn't stuck to it. And that is, I feel, what is so nice about the color shapers. It prevents a lot of that. A lot of it from sticking to.
Oh, Gary must have popped into the stream here a little bit and
Yeah.
confirmed that it is like 15 to 20-second way to convey those chat messages and stuff, such that it'll be easier for you to see them if like there aren't multiple people in the chat.
And so with these little shapers and stuff, you can sort of start to. Let's see if we can get the view better. But so like I've started to kind of create like a little fold in the boot here. And with the little knife edge here, it's like that it's fine enough in detail that you can actually go in there and kind of press it out and start feathering it out until you're happy with like what it looks like. And again, this is something where I'll do a little of this sculpting work here, kind of get some of the folds and stuff in there, and then I'll stop for a while, let it harden, come back, re-examine it, and decide if I'm happy with it or if I want to add more folds to the boot or whatever.
Like, when will you come back to do that? Will that be like when you could still put this like to the point that I would need
Oftentimes,
to cut some
no.
of it off?
I'll wait until it's hardened, and then if I was really unhappy with something, then I'd either have to cut it off. Yeah, then I just have to cut it off.
Yeah, okay.
But oftentimes, like since I am working a little slower at it, I tend not to have to cut stuff off. And again, here's where something like if you could actually get some like references of like leather boots and stuff, and kind of look to see how they might believably fold and bend, which I will say for a lot of things, if you go and look at real boots, you'll notice like, oh, hot damn, there are no folds in these boots. And so sometimes, depending on the material and stuff, like people will just add more folds and stuff just to make them look cooler, even if they might not necessarily have them. So, with that in mind, oftentimes you can get away with doing less and it'll still be fine. And in the end, it might actually even be closer to what it would look like in reality.
Gary said the feed looks good. I don't know. Maybe we'll have to. I feel it might be helpful, at least for something like this, where we're showing
Oh my god.
like what Adam's working on here. It might be better to find something in Streamlabs that has like a better chat box thing that displays it permanently on screen. If you have any suggestions on that, let us know.
That probably would
So
be better.
I know your stream has something like that, and I think that might be helpful, particularly when Adam's, if he's doing stuff like this, he's relatively focused on that and might not necessarily see stuff immediately.
I don't see it at all. Sorry, viewers.
But that's why we have a Discord group, right?
Yeah.
That no one's joined for
We
obvious
don't even
reasons.
use.
Yeah, well, someday we may use it if
Well, so
people are
actually,
on
one
there.
thing that I can probably actually end up doing, since it's probably hard for people to actually see what I'm doing right now, I can probably actually take a few pictures and actually with my phone and display some of them up on the screen as well.
Which you want to remove the cool
That cool Chaos Lord.
or what
Or
do you think
also
they're
whatever the
called?
fuck that is.
The chaplain thing. I don't remember what they're called. Dark Apostles. It's probably a Dark Apostle. That's skipping to
He's skipping to
his
Warp
next
Tour.
engagement. Yeah, likely Van's Warp Tour.
How did we start talking about that? That's been a running joke between my brothers and I for years about Chaos models going to Van's Warp Tour.
Yeah, they listen to all their favorite bands, like Yellow Card.
Yellow Card, so cool. So here, like I've actually just shown up on screen. Here's more of a kind of what I've been working on, because I think it's a little hard to see some of that and focus on some of that in the actual stream itself, because it goes in and out of focus all the time. But so that's something viewers can look at while I'm working on.
Yeah, no, it looks like the folds you did a fairly natural continuation of kind of some of the leather folds that had already been in the previous boot, and that looks nice.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I try and do, because oftentimes what you want to at least try, whatever you're doing, you want to make it at least pretty similar to what the rest of the model looks like, so it's not too jarring. But here you can sort of just go back and forth with it, reshaping and reworking everything until you're sort of happy with what it looks like. And again, I've had the most success with, I'll work at it for a little while, and then I feel like I'm at the point where I'm probably going to stop working with this boot here. I'll let it, and then maybe move on to something else. I'll let this dry and harden, and then that'll allow me I can go back in and add more detail if I'm not happy with it, or like replace or change detail. And so now I'm going to try and do a similar thing with the other boot here.
Yeah, I feel that's the hardest thing about doing green stuff.
Like a quality that I'm happy with, it just sort of necessitates, at least me as a sculptor, to do it in several different sessions. At this point, I don't think I'm good enough to do it more quickly than that. And that's sort of something that I'm trying to work on to get better at that. But
do you think using like something like mill put, whatever, could help with that?
potentially,
I guess you'd have to work with the
some
material.
people, if they're really interested in speed, actually instead of using milliput or modeling putty or anything like that, they actually use, I think, wax, like sculpting wax, and that you don't essentially have to wait until it dries, and so you can essentially constantly be working on stuff without worrying about.
So, but then would that like never really completely harden too?
I think that, I mean, it's always sort of hard, but not so hard that you can't like carve away at it. I'm not really sure. I think like if you you then have to go and make a cast of whatever it is you're working on, and I don't really know the process for doing that. I imagine it's similar to what I've done in the past, but
Yeah,
because none of that actually involves heating or anything, so you wouldn't have to worry that
it would melt or something.
what you worked on would like come apart or melt. And so I feel like if
Joe seems to be here on the stream.
If you were a commissioned sculptor, like
He says he sees us,
you'd have to.
and he's telling us that we can do that in the future.
But yeah, I think if you were like actually a commissioned sculptor, you'd always constantly have to be like figuring out a way that you could do stuff quickly and still have like a pretty good result. But in the case of what I'm working on, it's just working on a model or two at a time for just my own purposes. It doesn't matter as much. No, not on screen. figure out what can be done to make this focus better. Because viewers certainly won't be able to see what I'm actually doing. At least not well. So sorry, viewers. But I guess at least we're doing something. We have to start somewhere.
It's true. It's true. I feel it's looking at the changing the category. Like, unfortunately, I don't think you can have multiple categories for Twitch at a time. So we'll probably just have to go back and forth, switching them.
What were we at, like chat or something before?
More talk shows and podcasts currently. From that was the closest thing to what we were. I mean, I guess admittedly we could just change it always to creative or something.
Yeah. So there, like, I've did some of the initial work with both of the boots, at least filled in some of the initial seams, and now I'll probably say I'm done with them for a little while. And once they dry, then I can go back, and if I think I need to, I can start adding some more folds and other details, and I might even add some other details to the boots themselves, like modify the heels maybe of the boots. But all of that you can just do in stages. Come on. Oh, there you can sort of see it. And so now I guess the last thing I'll do is I'll try and do a little work on the model's eye patch and try and sculpt more of the cord holding on the eye patch. So this is a little more finicky because of how small it is. And again, here the color shapers, which I'm using, they help a lot here, where I'll often just get a small amount of green stuff on the end of the X-Acto blade, if I can even show it. No, whatever. A small amount. And then just roughly apply it where I want it to be. And then use the color shaper to start shaping it and spreading it out to look like approximately what I want it to look like. And so here now, if you can see, like, I'm sort of working it into like a thin strand of green stuff. Here, if the green stuff you were working with was starting to harden or was older, it gets a lot harder to do stuff like this and work at such like a small and fine scale. So I think it also depends on what you're trying to sculpt, as well as to how much, as to whether you want to get new green stuff or not. But I feel the big thing I would say to that is, don't feel like, oh, or at least I would recommend not to feel like, oh, you have to use all of the green stuff you have, or like, oh, I'm wasting some of it or something. Because
Particularly
ultimately,
in a hobby like this where you already are spending a fair amount of money and investing time in it.
yeah, I
like
feel
what's five more
ultimately
dollars?
it just comes down to the end product, and if I have to spend a little more for to achieve the result I want, I'm fine with that. So it ultimately just comes down to
Your priorities, I
your
guess.
priorities. Yeah. But yeah, so here, let me actually just take another picture of this with my phone and post that up to have like another thing to look at. Well, okay.
I know, Nick. You do some sculpting work, or at least a bunch with some of your models. Do you use any sort of thing like color shapers or things like that? Or and same thing for Destiny Blooms. If you're still um, in here, I wonder like the how do you kind of do your work? Do you um, just use normal sculpting, like kind of the metal sculpting tools, or what sort of things? So Nick, he says he uses 100% use metal tools. Then I use color shapers.
Okay. Yeah, I feel I've been using the color shapers for a few years now, and probably it was sometime in like maybe the first or second year of blogging that I realized that they were incredible.
Yeah, they made stuff so much easier.
Yeah, because I feel right now like some of this detail work that I'm trying to do to file out and like thread out some of the putty for this eye patch would be very difficult to do. Because I feel before I probably would have tried to like actually roll out a little snake of modeling putty and use that, but it's very hard to get something like that thin enough
Hmm.
to actually achieve like the size and stuff that I wanted. So
All right, Destiny says that yeah, he uses metal tools and he only recently started sculpting, so there's a lot to learn. Yeah, now there's always a lot to learn, but from the little I've seen you, your work on Instagram, like it looks really good.
yeah, so I mean, you can certainly get away with using the metal tools and stuff, and I've used them for years. But And particularly if you, I think maybe if you'd start to use some other like lubricant or something to try and prevent um, the stuff from sticking to your tools, that would probably be fine and sufficient. No. God. Stupid camera. Guess I'm probably just not using it for what it was meant to do. It's meant to look at faces. So I guess it's probably doing a fine job for that. Well, I think that's about all I'm gonna try and do for now. Let's see if it's gonna be even harder now because it's probably harder for this to focus on the. Now, there you can kind of see it. So I've done a little bit more on the eye patch there, and I've sculpted a little bit more of the cord, but I still haven't gotten quite around to the other side, so that is something I'll probably do in the final session, or in the next session of green stuffing. But I don't think I want to do any more, lest I screw up what I've already done. We'll see what I end up doing. Like, I almost have half a mind to try and, on our eye patch, sculpt a tiny little twin-tailed comet. Might not be good enough to do that. Or maybe I should just paint that on the eye patch. Who knows? I guess what do viewers think? Try and eventually sculpt a little twin-tailed comet on the eye patch, or just get away with trying to paint it. And I guess, Eric, what do you think? You're gone, Eric? Where have you gone? And see, again, like, I find myself just constantly going back and, like, looking at it and reworking and retweaking what I'm working on. So there always just comes a point in time where you just have to tell yourself it's good enough for now, and you can go back and, if you're ultimately not satisfied with it, improve it thereafter. So I think we'll call it done for now. So I guess I replaced the feet on both of the feet on the model. Started doing the green stuff work to kind of remedy all the gaps and stuff that I introduced, and then started to do a little sculpting on her eye patch. Okay. So alright. So that's all for that model. I guess now I still do have green stuff that's not really hardened yet. I could start working on one of the other models. And do a little bit more work with that. So let's actually look at them and see if there's something I want to try and do. Okay, so I can do a little bit more work on the first Sister of Sigmar. So Eric, I think you missed a bunch of stuff. Can you hear me, Eric? I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. I was pulled away. Okay. I hear you.
I can hear you now, too.
So I think I'm going to have to go relatively soon.
Okay.
You don't necessarily have to stop, though. But
Okay, I don't know. I can't tell if we got any other comments.
Nick says here, how would you sculpt something so fine detail as even my super fine tool is not great, and I end up using the tip of a needle?
Well, yeah, so that's probably what I'd end up doing using an X-Acto knife. Um, a needle could work as well, but even like I've been surprised with the little angle chisel of these color shapers. You can actually get some pretty fine detail stuff just with that, which and like if you've been following our work for a while, some of the like Imperial Guard models that I worked on, like the that I like resculpted all the webbing and stuff on them. A lot of them have like little tiny belt buckles and stuff. Those I just sculpted all really slowly this little with the little color shaper and just slowly working and reworking it until it's roughly how I want it. So
Mm-hmm.
it would probably be a combination between that and an X-Acto blade. Mind you, to sculpt something as small as a little comment on that eye patch, it's gonna be rough. So, but, and probably when I do end up going to do it, I will try for a little while, and if I'm happy with it, I'll keep it. If not, would probably just get a new X-Acto blade and slice off what I didn't like. And so that's another thing. Well, as I feel I'm pretty, maybe what you would say, pretty wasteful with green stuff. I also feel like I'm a little wasteful for X-Acto blades. I feel I replace them all the time because it doesn't take long for them to start to dull, and then I've found they really affect how well they work. So I often like I've spent some time to clean up my workspace here for this stream, but oftentimes like after I've been working for a while, my workspace will just be strewn with extra like X-Acto blades and stuff. And I'll often keep older ones around, and those are the ones I'll use for sculpting. So I do make use of some of the older ones even after they're not as suitable for like cutting and stuff. But
Mm-hmm. One thing that you could consider, I think I've found on my phone, I can if you bring up YouTube and go to the channel in like the
mm-hmm.
live stream, you can see the YouTube chat there, the
Yeah,
bottom
see,
and
I
top.
went up and did that, and it's still saying it's connecting to the chat, and it doesn't ever connect.
Hmm. Okay, well maybe you could start it and stop it again or whatever. But at least when I went to it, it worked okay.
Yeah. I mean, I can see like the stream's going okay, but I don't.
Hmm. Yeah, because there's a live chat button next to the thumbs up, thumbs down, which you can go to.
It just keeps saying that it's updating
Hmm. Well, okay.
the stream chat. So yeah, I don't know.
Something to work out in the future, I guess.
Yeah.
Destiny here mentions that he spent more time than he'd care to admit on that Gilliman model with like kind of the parchment and the flames and stuff.
Oh,
Guess that's kind of
understandable.
what it takes. Any like, I mean, it certainly looks like the time was well spent, or it looks really good. And
Yeah.
um, the more time you put into stuff, it shows. I think, and it allows you to kind of get better. It means you're taking maybe a little bit more risks, and that's how you're going to get better. So it's worth
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Ultimately, I feel anytime when you try and go out and try and push yourself, that's like a good thing. But then again, also sort of like when you're trying to do something new, like just because like you spend a lot of time on something sculpting it, if you don't like it, that doesn't mean you have to keep it, even if you've spent a lot of time on it. And that's sort of something where with me, like if I ultimately don't like the way it looks, I won't keep it. I'll redo it because ultimately I'm spending so much time on each of these models. Like I don't really want to go back and look at it like, well, that looks like shit, and I should have
Hmm.
redone it, but I was too lazy to do it. But
Yeah.
so now I'm trying to do a little more detail work on the original sisters, one of her boots. Trying to, like, I started sculpting some of the um, extra detailing of that, and I hadn't finished it. And here, like, I still don't, I won't finish them here in this session either. But I'm starting to lay down some of the foundations for the boots that I can then go back and build upon.
Nick says he's currently doing some freehand on his Reaver Titans, and it's taking a lot longer than expected. Which I
Freehand
noticed
always takes a
actually
long
on
time.
Kraut Scientist Eternal Hunt blog. He recently posted a kind of the second recap of the year post talking about his work. He mentioned that I think he started to do some freehand stuff with some of those micron pens, which is I know something that Johan, like Jeff Vader, Johan from the Convertorum, must do a bunch of to like, I guess, make little Inquisition symbols, things like that. And I feel it would be a little interesting to see how something like that might work.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. It would be particularly like on parchments and stuff like that, and larger
Yeah, I
font
think for
surfaces.
that, like little checker patterns and stuff like that, it might be worthwhile. If it's like, yeah, really small stuff, like if it's a larger like thing on a Titan shoulder or like or whatever, I think it maybe you kind of have to slog through the painting aspect. But
Yeah. I think so. I've done a little bit more work on the back of this boot, and I think I'll also. So all of these Caldor models, like they just had a bunch of like, or most of them had a bunch of like tattered bands and like bandages and stuff on their legs, and so here, like I trimmed a lot of that off, and have been in the process of like sculpting on more traditional pants on the models, and I've slowly been working with that. Sculpting the little here again, like it can be really helpful to have like references and stuff to like how cloth actually folds and everything. But in some regards, oftentimes, if you kind of just get in there and do something, add some like folds and stuff, oftentimes it'll look pretty good, and it's often convincing enough that you don't necessarily have to make it perfect. And it's also the type of thing that like I sometimes feel like some of the details and stuff that I spend all this time on working and sculpting and stuff, I sort of feel like I'm the only one who ever notices them. But that's fine. That's how I've taken to doing stuff, and that's what I want to do. So it's ultimately when you're going in here and like making the different models, like you just have to do what makes you happy and what you're satisfied with. So like because ultimately at the end of the day, you're going to be the one who will think most about the model and have to look at it more. So, and another thing that I guess I can say, like I've learned an awful lot by posting my work on Instagram and the blog and forums and stuff, and like listening to what other people say and their comments and suggestions. Because oftentimes I found with a lot of the models, like if you spend so much time working at them, sometimes you're a little too close to the model to see like obvious mistakes or obvious things that could be changed.
That is certainly true.
So, I really that's one of the things I really like about the hobby is when people sort of like respect your stuff enough that they'll actually tell you really honest and serious comments about your work and things like, you know what, like you could look into changing this or this could be modified in such a way. And I feel I've learned an awful lot from stuff like that.
Yeah, no, it's true. Like, because there's so much that you can learn and stuff, particularly when in the subject of sculpting and stuff. Like, you have to, if you're thinking like you want to actually modify like one of Games Workshop models, their proportions, things like that. Like, there's a lot of stuff that you have to take into consideration.
Yeah, because I'm certainly not an expert sculptor. I was not trained in anything like this. I was trained in like biochemistry and like electron microscopy and stuff, so very different.
Yeah, not quite the same.
Not quite. Here, I'll try and take another picture of what I've been laboring away here that you may or may not be able to actually see. I'll put that up in the side panel so you can get a slightly better view of what I'm working on. Okay. Okay. So there you can kind of see, or hopefully you can kind of see there on the screen, you can tell in and around like the knee of the model and stuff like that, like the folds and the cloth and stuff there. That's kind of what I've been working at, as well as the upper top part of the boot. I think for both of the boots, I need to do some more work um, work at them. They look a little uneven and kind of sloppy. So, but I think that's gonna be work that I'll do later.
You look pretty good. But I feel it is one of those things you can always kind of go in and do more if you want to. And in some sense, you kind of have to pick like when you're going to be done.
Yeah.
The same goes with painting and like most things with this, this hobby, even trimming models and trimming off mold lines. Like you can always kind of keep going and do a better and better job for tiny, minute things that maybe most people won't even notice. But like if it's important to you and what you're wanting to achieve, like
Yeah.
it's time.
I mean, hell, for the latest model that I worked on, this Haber, the happening Haber, as we like to refer to her as. Like, I actually physically went in and resculpted. I sculpted her legs underneath her robes because currently she's glued on this base. But if you like look up underneath the trench coat, if you've actually looked at these models, she only her boots are sculpted, and then she just doesn't have legs. So I went in and resculpted her legs because I thought she needed legs. But okay, so for all the viewers, hopefully you at least got a little bit out of that. I think I'm gonna call this call the meeting to a close or the stream.
You might be able to quickly just, um, I think Nick might have sent a picture or two of the freehand work he's doing. It looks really nice.
Oh,
She might
boy. Yeah, I'll bring.
project for a little bit.
Oh, that looks great. Little eldritch symbols and such.
Elders looks good.
Ooh, they're cool. They look great, actually. Yeah, there's a lot of surface to do stuff like that. That's cool. Heck yeah.
Titans are great.
They are great.
One thing about doing freehand work like that's annoying too, though, is the fact that it's often with white and stuff like that, which tends to dry really quickly, like on the tip of your brush and stuff. Or at least that's what I find. And it can be a real pain.
Yeah. No, that's true. White can be a nightmare.
But overall, I think this was a pretty successful stream, like to at least see if it's viable. And I think it'll work. I'm showing kind of some of the stuff you're working on, like is good. And Destiny asked if he could send his work for critique next time. And like, yeah, I mean, we'd love to see some of your work. We can project some of it and talk about it, and
I guess
that sort
like
of.
if you use Discord, we have a Discord channel that we haven't used it too much, but feel free to join that.
Yeah, one of the thoughts was that it might be a place that people could share some of the stuff that they're working on, and we can kind of talk through there, and also potentially project it on kind of some of our chats and or some of these streams and stuff, and talk about it and such. And it's great that you were able to join us, and
Yeah.
good to touch base with a fellow hobbyist and someone who's venturing into the difficult world of sculpting and such. And I've already had a lot of success with it, so it's really neat.
Yeah, awesome.
And I guess for the Discord thing, I believe uh, we there's like a link on the side of our blog for Between the Bolter and Me, as well as on the bottom of the Twitch channel. There's something, but since you're going through YouTube here, I feel probably just going to Between the Bolter and Me would be the best way to join that if you're interested in. And if not, even with that, I'm sure we can connect you through Instagram, Messenger, or something like that too.
Or even Hangouts too, or Google if you use
Yeah, Google
Hangouts.
Hangouts. That's something that we have started to use a bunch of. But yeah, I mean, it would be really great to uh, touch base with you
Because yeah,
more.
that's
And
one of the
as you're
ways
saying,
like you can learn about stuff. Like I've certainly learned a lot from other sculptors, even just looking at their work in progress shots and stuff. And I feel
and
that's
as
one of
Nick says here, that should do a segment each stream, and I think that that's a really
it's
good
a good
idea. That
idea.
I think we want to start to do is just talking about have a short segment talking about models that maybe we've seen on Instagram or something that really stood out and what we like and think either we would like to incorporate or just talking about models because there's such a huge amount of different cool things people are doing, and the more we can talk about them and think about how we might be able to incorporate them ourselves or what we like, don't, all those things I think can be helpful.
Yes, certainly, because I know I've learned a lot from either just talking to other people, looking at work in progress shots of models and stuff. And that was sort of one of the things. I know certain people will only show their like finished models and stuff, and well, I think that's great. And it's a good way to see like more like maybe the final vision of the models. But I've always, certainly with our blog and Instagram and stuff, we like to try and show some of the stages and work in progress of the models because I think, at least for me, it's a good way to like learn and kind of get a sense of how people do things. And we hope that different viewers and stuff can like learn from that and um, kind of get a sense of how we do things. But yeah. All right. So, do you have anything else you want to say, Eric?
No, I don't think so. Again, yeah, thanks everybody for listening.
Yeah.
I think hopefully we'll be able to start doing some of these streams more often, as well as we're still going to continue our kind of evening podcast, sort of related, just chatting about models, which are on Tuesdays, the 11 Eastern Standard Time, which is pretty late for basically everyone, but um, we'll be there and happy to have anyone join or listen to it after the fact. And hopefully, we can also do some of these hobby related ones at some other times, some that are maybe more more people can join. But
Yeah,
it's a
certainly.
sort of a global hobby that you never know where people are from and such. So in that sense, it can be hard to find a good time. But the more, the better.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right,
So, all right.
everyone. Well, thanks for the good stream. Thanks for the comments and tuning in. And we will talk to you again soon. Until next time, keep on hobbying.